In 1960, Brazil made a bold move. They decided to build an entirely new capital city from scratch. But the story doesn't end there. This monumental project would change the country forever, and the price was steeper than anyone could imagine. But that was just the beginning. What follows will completely change your perspective. In the late 1950s, Brazil was rapidly growing, but there was a problem. Its capital, Rio de Janeiro, was becoming overcrowded and inefficient. To solve this, the government made an unprecedented decision to create an entirely new capital city built from scratch. This would symbolize Brazil's modernity and future aspirations. And so, in 1960, Brasília was born. But how did they manage such an ambitious and monumental task? How could a city, designed from scratch, be built in such a short time? With futuristic architecture and a master plan crafted by some of the most renowned architects of the time, Brasília began its journey to become the world's newest and perhaps most controversial capital city. But there was more to this move than just urban planning. What would be the real cost of this bold decision? But this decision came with a huge price tag. As construction of Brasília progressed, the costs began to soar. The vision of a futuristic city required massive financial investments. The Brazilian government borrowed heavily, and the project's scope expanded with ambitious infrastructure plans. But despite the staggering financial demands, there was a belief that Brasília would transform Brazil's economy. It would open up the interior of the country, stimulate growth, and serve as a beacon of progress. Yet, as the years passed, the reality set in. By the time Brasília was finished, the financial burden was overwhelming. The project's massive cost led Brazil into an economic crisis. What drove the government to continue despite the mounting debt? Could the dream of Brasília's success ever match the price tag attached to it? Was the vision of a bright, new capital worth plunging the country into financial peril? But as costs skyrocketed, the consequences would soon become clear. Despite the mounting financial burden, the construction of Brasília pushed forward. But this project was more than just about building a city. It was about building a symbol. Brasília was meant to represent Brazil's aspirations for modernity and progress. Yet, as costs escalated, doubts started to surface. Was the country sacrificing its future for a dream that might never be realized? Workers poured hours into the construction, while government officials promised that the new capital would lead Brazil into a prosperous future. But the question remained, could this gamble ever pay off? Brasília's construction was emblematic of Brazil's broader vision, but would the financial cost end up sinking the country instead of lifting it? And as the city neared completion, the Brazilian people began to wonder, had they built a utopia, or were they facing a looming financial disaster? But there was something bigger brewing beneath the surface. As construction continued, the costs of building Brasília escalated. The government borrowed heavily to fund the project, and inflation spiraled out of control. By the time the city neared completion, Brazil was facing an economic crisis. What started as a symbol of progress was quickly turning into a financial nightmare. The dream of Brasília was becoming a nightmare, and the question was no longer if it would succeed, but whether it would destroy Brazil's economy in the process. People started to wonder if the government had overestimated their vision and if this grand project was worth the price. Could the vision for a new capital ever match the staggering costs it had incurred? But there was more than just financial pressure building behind the scenes. As tensions over the costs of Brasília mounted, workers found ways to lighten the mood. Some joked that they were building not just a new city, but a whole new economy. In fact, the construction site became a lively place full of humor and camaraderie, despite the mounting pressures. Workers laughed about the new capital that would cost more than it was worth, but the reality was still looming. The mix of humor and stress created an odd but necessary balance in those trying times. While officials debated the future of the project, the workers just wanted to finish their job and take a well-earned break. Little did they know, the future of Brazil rested on their shoulders. But now, let's return to the serious side of things. With the construction of Brasília nearing completion, the situation grew more urgent. The city, meant to symbolize progress, had become a financial burden. As the government tried to find solutions, the cost continued to climb and inflation soared. The original vision of Brasília as a symbol of a modern Brazil seemed further and further out of reach. The project's debt was so high that many questioned if the country could ever recover from it. The decision to build Brasília was now seen as an impossible gamble that had risked everything. But with the city nearly finished, the question remained, would Brasília be a success, or would its legacy be one of financial ruin? And now, there's something even bigger on the horizon. As Brasília neared completion, the financial strain on Brazil grew unbearable. The government had invested everything into this new capital, but questions began to surface. Could the dream survive the reality of such overwhelming debt? The situation became critical as the public's discontent grew. Would the people of Brazil accept this financial burden, or would Brasília be remembered not for its futuristic design, but for the collapse of the country's economy? The pressure was building, and it seemed inevitable that something had to give. As we moved forward, one thing was clear. Brasília's story was about to take a dramatic turn. And then, the truth behind Brasília's financial turmoil was revealed. The construction of Brasília had drained Brazil's finances to the breaking point. But the real shock came when it was revealed that the project had cost far more than expected. While the city was intended to boost Brazil's economy, it instead pushed the country into a financial collapse. The cost of the city not only strained the government, but led to the rapid devaluation of Brazil's currency. What was meant to symbolize modernity had inadvertently become a financial disaster. Brasília, the dream city, had not only failed to deliver on its promises, but had set Brazil back for years. But the story doesn't end there. There's more to the tale of Brasília. Amidst the chaos, there was still room for humor. Workers jokingly referred to Brasília as the most expensive city ever built, laughing at the irony of creating a city to represent modern Brazil while the country itself was sinking into debt. Some would even joke that they were building the city of dreams, as long as you didn't mind being bankrupt. Despite the crisis, the workers' lighthearted attitude offered a brief escape from the mounting pressures. After all, what else could you do when the entire country's future seemed to rest on your shoulders? But now, the real consequences of this colossal project are coming to light. As the country grappled with the aftermath of Brasília's construction, something unexpected happened. Despite the overwhelming financial crisis, the city itself began to attract global attention. Tourists marveled at the futuristic design, and diplomats were impressed by the modern infrastructure. Brasília, once seen as a financial disaster, now began to symbolize something else: resilience. Brazil's bold attempt at building a city of the future was not entirely in vain. Slowly, Brasília started to gain international recognition for its architectural brilliance, but even as the city's reputation began to rise, the cost of its creation continued to haunt the country. Could Brasília's success as a global icon make up for the economic chaos it caused? But even as the city was celebrated, the financial troubles were far from over. As Brasília's reputation grew internationally, the question lingered: could the city's symbolic importance ever justify the financial devastation it caused? The government continued to struggle with the debt, and inflation remained a heavy burden on the country. The gap between Brasília's success as an architectural marvel and the reality of Brazil's ongoing economic crisis was widening. Would Brasília's image as a symbol of progress be enough to lift Brazil out of the financial hole it had dug? The world watched as Brazil's future seemed to hang in the balance, teetering between the city's rising fame and the mounting financial collapse. And now, the most critical moment is about to arrive. The tension was palpable. As Brasília continued to grow as a symbol of modernity, Brazil's financial collapse seemed imminent. The economic crisis had reached its peak, and there was no clear way out. The government was scrambling to find solutions, but the weight of Brasília's enormous cost was too much. Would the city's fame ultimately be its salvation, or would it remain a monument to Brazil's greatest gamble? As the story of Brasília neared its final chapter, the world waited to see how this bold experiment in urban design would affect Brazil's future. The dream of Brasília had come at an unimaginable cost, but would it deliver a lasting legacy? Before the final truth is revealed, let's take a moment to reflect. As the crisis deepened, a bit of humor was still able to surface. Workers jokingly referred to Brasília as the city that keeps on giving you debt. Some even laughed about how they had built the city of the future, only for it to be stuck in the past financially. The irony of it all wasn't lost on anyone. Despite the mounting financial pressure, workers continued with their tasks, even making light of the situation. Who knew building a city would cost the whole country? One worker quipped, while others chuckled. It wasn't all doom and gloom, but with the government scrambling for solutions, the workers' humor was a brief but necessary respite from the unfolding crisis. But the real bombshell is coming right up. After years of struggle and irony, the final moment arrived. The realization was unavoidable. Brasília's price tag had been astronomical, and it had left Brazil in dire financial straits. But despite everything, the city stood as a testament to the country's ambition. Was it worth the sacrifice? Some believed it was a symbolic achievement that showed Brazil's strength and vision, while others couldn't shake the feeling that the financial cost would haunt the nation for decades to come. The truth was clear. Brasília wasn't just a city, it was the ultimate gamble. And now, as the dust settled, Brazil had to reckon with its creation. Would the legacy of Brasília be one of triumph, or would it be remembered as a cautionary tale? And now, the final truth about Brasília will leave you speechless. The truth behind Brasília's creation is both shocking and undeniable. In the end, the cost of building the city was far greater than anyone had ever imagined. Brazil's economic collapse was the true price of this ambitious project. Brasília had drained the nation's resources, leaving a legacy of debt and hardship. But even as the financial crisis deepened, Brasília remained an iconic symbol of Brazil's modernist vision. It was a dream come true in terms of architecture, but it came with an unbearable price. Brasília became not just a city, but a warning, a cautionary tale about the risks of ambition, the dangers of unchecked spending, and the true cost of dreams. The legacy of Brasília is forever linked to its massive price tag, a symbol of both Brazil's boldness and its costly mistake.